I recently did a video on whether Greydon Square, the hip-hop artist from America, is antinatalist or not. That video will be linked in the description, along with the reaction video he did to that, and also an interview I recently did with him. In this video, though, I want to do a breakdown, or my personal interpretation, of the lyrics of his song that most focuses on antinatalism, which is If I Had a Choice. Now, there are a variety of references to antinatalism in his album Compton Scattering, which was released in 2017, but If I Had a Choice is the main song he focuses on the topic of antinatalism. Now, before I get into this, in my previous video on If Greydon Square is Antinatalist, I actually made a couple of errors in the lyrics that I had up on screen, which he since corrected, and I'm using the correct ones now. And the second thing I want to say is, if Greydon does ever see this and wants to put something in the comments or do another reaction video, go easy on me. I am definitely not going to pick up on all of the things in the lyrics. So let's get into it. So what I'm going to do is go through line by line, or maybe a few lines at a time, and the antinatalist messaging in it. So the first couple of lines: what right do I have to impose the skyscraping, dizzy and highs of brutal lows? What kind of qualifications or expertise do I hold to create a life? So there are two things here that I picked up on. The first is this questioning of what right one person has to impose the goods and bads in a life. Now, obviously, there's the question of, are the goods in someone's life a reason to create them? But even if we're just looking at it from the perspective of, life does contain goods and bads, and some of those goods are very good and some of those bads are very bad. And when you talk to a lot of people who are okay with or support procreation, they can often say, life contains goods and bads. I'm fine with that trade-off. I'm going to create someone else. But we really have to question, just because you're fine with that trade-off and we want to frame it in that way, why does that mean that you can accept the trade-off for someone else? People's lives, yes, contain highs and yes, contain lows, but why is it up to you to decide on behalf of someone else that they will take on those lows to get the highs? Especially since the lows can often be much, much lower and much more drawn out than the highs. The second thing is this questioning of what qualifications do we hold to create someone else? Now, kind of removing the ethics from this, because that would get very murky, I just want to talk about a matter-of-fact observation of what reality is like at the moment. We live in a world where, quite rightly, you need qualifications to get certain jobs. Basically, any job, you have to have some level of competency. We don't just let anyone do anything. And in fact, if someone was going to do something to us, like, for example, a surgery, or if someone was going to do something even for us, and we were going to pay them for, like a solicitor, we'd want to know that they were qualified to do that, especially if the backfire on us could be massive. But when it comes to procreation, someone is doing something to someone else, creating them, that in my view will always have backfire. But even if someone's of the view that it doesn't always have backfire, it could potentially have massive backfire for that person. Their life could go horribly wrong. We just take this laissez-faire approach to procreation. Anyone, it doesn't matter who you are, you can have a kid and you can have basically as many as you want. This seems like an extremely inadequate approach to a very serious topic. I'm an orphan, even from that plate doesn't taste right. It's not as important as the whole prevention of suffering. What if that was the goal? Not to inflict this upon other beings is kind of cold. Also, I can't help do this in the rhyme of the song, so I'm kind of half reading them out, half trying to awkwardly rap them. Anyway, so what I get from these lyrics is that it's really questioning, what is the goal of all of this? There's kind of two things here. What is the goal when we're setting out to create someone else? And what is the goal of society generally? Should our goal be to try and reduce the bads in the world, reduce the suffering in the world, rather than force more people into situations where it's going to perpetuate the bads and it's going to inflict those bads on them? But let's consider this: either you're predator or prey, still the amount of death that you face is ridiculous. So here I think this is a criticism of the fact that often things that we want or benefit from can come at the detriment of someone else. Now, I don't think this is always the case, and I'm sure Greydon doesn't either. There are many ways that we can interact with others where we actually both benefit from that exchange. But there's also many ways that we interact or impact each other and others that actually really isn't of benefit to them. And this also goes for life generally. So one classic example is a lion eating a gazelle, which really plays into either you're predator or prey. Clearly, the lion is benefiting from that, but the gazelle is awfully losing out from that interaction. And that also goes for humans as well. Some of the ways that we impact others is to our benefit, but it comes to the detriment and the loss of the other individual. And when we create new people, we put them into this complex web of interactions and impacts they're going to have on others. And again, like I said, some of those will will be good, but many of them will actually come to harm others. Some people wander around and wonder why us? Why would I inflict this on something I love? A lethal blip just to engage in an ego trip. So again, I think there's two things here. I think the first one is about existential anxiety or having an existential crisis about the fact that a lot of people walk around and think, what is actually the ultimate purpose of this? Like, why are we here? And a lot of people get existential anxiety around this, especially around the bad things that happen to them in their life. The fact that these bad things can happen to them, say they get cancer, and it's for no ultimate purpose. It just happened to them. They just got a short straw and now they're fucked. And Greydon asked the question, well, why would you put that on someone else if you don't have to? And then about the lethal blip and the ego trip. Obviously, the lethal blip is talking about, well, two things really. The fact that our lives are so short in the scale of time as a whole, i.e. they're a blip, but also it's a lethal blip. It's a blip that ultimately ends in death. And death is widely seen as a harm. Throughout our lives, we become attached to things, people become attached to us, but ultimately we're going to be ripped away from those attachments. And that's fundamentally built into life. The forming of attachments and the breaking of those attachments through us dying. And why do people put other people in this situation? A lot of times for an ego trip. Someone wants a mini-me. Someone wants to have an easy source of meaning in their life. And look, maybe it's not always charitable by referring to it as an ego trip, even though I do think sometimes it is accurately referred to as an ego trip. But I get that sometimes, someone will have a child because maybe they're lonely or maybe they can't find a sense of meaning in their life. And we should have sympathy for those people. But putting someone else into that situation and essentially creating like a procreational Ponzi scheme where I can't find meaning in my life, so I create someone to get meaning, but then they need meaning in their life, so they're going to have to create someone. This doesn't seem like the best approach to solving the problems in our lives that we have and are on us to solve, rather than creating someone and kicking the can down the road, in which evil exists and nature needs no assist. Say we opted out, be life going its own way, never creating it to suffer, knowing it goes away. Now, I don't know if the life going its own way is a reference to the men going their own way movement, but what I get from this is essentially Greydon stating the fact that it is an option just not to continue this cycle of suffering, of birth and death and birth and death. Like, you can walk away from that and just say no, you don't have to continue that cycle. This world ain't worthy of my kids, it's not of usage. If I can prevent their birth, then I'ma do it. I think that's pretty clear. I don't need to go into that. So then we've got the chorus, which I'm only going to go through once because it does repeat a few times. I'm not going to go through it each time. So let's have a look. Because if I had a choice, I would never bring a life into this world. As if I had a choice, I'd prefer it had not been done to me. If I had a choice, I would never inflict this kind of misery. If I had a choice, I'd rather not exist within an oblivious sea of peace. So I've really got two things to say on this. The first one is of this idea of the oblivious sea of peace. I really like this lyric. I don't think it accurately portrays reality. Like, I think if we're not born, then we simply never exist. It's not like there is this sort of sea of peace that, spirits are existing in a peaceful state and then they're ripped from that and they come into the world when someone procreates. In my view, there is just nothingness. There is no experience of any kind. But I understand that this is a lyric trying to paint a picture. It's not necessarily trying to say this is exactly how the world exists. And I actually really like this framing. The other thing I want to pick up on is the idea of preferring it not being done to Greydon, or just preferring that you'd never came into existence. Now, some people may look at this and think, well, that's fucking depressing. But I don't necessarily see it as depressing. I think you can be perfectly happy with your life as it is now and want to continue existing, but just intellectually recognize, not even on an emotional level of lamenting your own life and lamenting the fact that you exist, but on an intellectual level, recognizing that it would have been better if you had not been created. Because you wouldn't exist to care that you're missing out on anything, but you wouldn't have been created to suffer the things that you have suffered since being created. There is nothing to gain or no advantage to coming into existence. So let's move on to the second verse. Better to never have been than experience. You probably think differently, but I believe life insidious. Follow me. I don't have much to say on these. It's just clearly a recognition of the fact that it would have been better never to exist, and that he's trying to call on other people to consider this way of thinking and hopefully change their mind. I think it's also a reference to David Benatar's book, Better Never to Have Been, which I'll flash up on screen and I'll link it in the description as well for people to check out. I do think if someone wants to read a book on the topic of antinatalism, that is the best book to start with. I've read that book. I really enjoyed it. I think it's well written, so I'd highly recommend it to people. A novelty, sure, a sentiment due to wear off, hardly a gift, at best it's a job. So here, what I get from this is that the goods in life are definitely a novelty while you're experiencing them. them. But this attachment to the goods in life is, as I see it, sentimental. And they have benefit to us, but they don't have any intrinsic benefit in the way that we should create people merely for the purpose of them experiencing good things. And also it's maybe reference to the fact that the good things in life can often be seen as a novelty to people that are in the moment of really enjoying them and are in a good period of their life. But if you were to go through the hard times and really recognize what suffering can be and where it can take you, you'll maybe become less insistent on creating other people and being the salesperson of life that maybe that person is at that point in time. And on Hardly a Gift at Best It's a Job, this is a reference obviously to the fact that many people reference life as being a gift. And I agree that this should be reframed. I don't think it's best to frame life as a gift. It's something at the end of the day that is forced upon someone, that comes with guarantees of harm and the guarantee of death. And remember, those harms in the gift of life are not something that you have to go out of your way to experience. The harms of life just exist often as a baseline. Hunger and thirst are a baseline that we have to actively pursue resources to stave off. It's not like the baseline of life is satiety and being satisfied. The baseline of life seems to be unsatisfaction and us having to put effort into satisfying the desires and the needs that we have. Where your retirement either consists of either you getting sick or your family that you love you miss and you reminisce for. I think this lyric refers to the rough periods of life that can often come at the end, where many of the people, or basically everyone who is essentially putting themselves in a position of advocating for life, which is implicit in creating someone. If you create someone, you're clearly advocating for life there, saying, this is a good enough thing to perpetuate, I'll create someone else. These people all do that with an incomplete picture of what life actually is, or what even their life is going to be like. Given that we have to reproduce in our early years, we by definition haven't experienced the later years in our life when often a lot of the harms can accrue, which we obviously haven't come into contact with at the point that we self-appoint ourselves as the salespersons of life. The entrance to this place, you can seal and lock the doors. This wouldn't have been a universe that I opted for. So again, here Greydon is just reminding us, you don't have to continue the cycle of procreation. You can seal and lock the doors, as he says it. The inherent entropy outweighs the time and worth. I'd like to see you justify the crime of birth. So I don't have anything to say on the first line here. Maybe people can put in the comments what they think, because I'm not entirely sure how Greydon is using the term entropy here. But when it comes to him saying that he'd like to see people justify the crime of birth, there's two things going on here that I can see. The first is framing birth as a crime, which is a reframing of how it's seen, which will be something that people will have to engage with. But it's also a reframing of it as something you need to justify. Clearly, reproduction is something that is a morally relevant act. You're taking an action on behalf of someone else which is extremely consequential to their future well-being. In fact, creating someone is literally the most significant thing you can do to them, because it puts them at risk of everything else that could happen to them in life. Protest my life but not creating any. I can save souls from hell like your savior sent me. So I really like this lyric, because what Greydon is doing here is relating his point to religion or theism, in that presumably any decent religious person doesn't want anyone to go to hell. Even people who they view as sinners, they presumably want those people to reform, repent, and then end up in heaven. But not everyone can be saved from hell in these people's eyes. There will be people who will commit sin and they won't repent in the adequate way or reform in the adequate way, and so they will end up going to hell. But what Greydon's saying here is that he's not creating anyone, and so he's not sending anyone to hell. He's not putting anyone on that track that will eventually lead in them going to hell. And so actually you have religious people who believe in hell and believe people will go to hell, perpetuating the cycle of people going to hell. And what Greydon's saying here is that he's kind of referring to himself as like as if your savior sent him, as in he's living more in alignment with the philosophy of not sending people to hell than religious people, because he's not creating anyone to end up in hell. Safer ending, I'm sure it's the closest to it, and even though it promises loss and pain, most would do it. So here he's referencing the fact that even though people know life contains loss and pain, and they are opting to impose that on someone else, not on themselves. It's not like they're choosing to do this to themselves. They're choosing to impose that on someone else. Even though people are fully aware of that, they still choose to do it. And I actually think a lot of people still choose to do it because they don't fully really make contact with the idea that their child will suffer and that they will be responsible for that because they chose to put that kid in that position where they knew all of that stuff could happen. We wouldn't swim the live stream choking on fluid with Pandora's box open for viewing. So here, I really like this imagery. Obviously, viewing life or, sentient experience as a Pandora's box that has been opened. And, beside the heat death of the universe, it probably is. But also this idea of the live stream choking on fluid, obviously referring to the live stream being life, experience, sentience. But the fact that actually we're here in the live stream because we exist, but there's so much suffering in life that we're actually choking on the fluid of the live stream. And I think that's a really creative way of putting it. So now we'll get on to the third and final verse. If the beat is the room, my rhyme's elephant. The question is, would it be better to have never been? A philosophical conundrum. Fearful people can always be triggered when you rob them of their comforts. So the only thing I have to comment on is this last line here about fearful people being robbed of their comforts. And I think this could mean two things. The first is that people cope with the suffering of life by trying to find meaning or focusing on the good things in life. But obviously questioning whether it would have been better to have been draws focus to the harms in life, which often people can be triggered by because they don't want to think of that. But also people see the kids they've created as a form of comfort. And if you question whether they should have created them, that can also lead people to get triggered, as he says. The scale of life when compared to a vacuum, a sad display. The infinites make the finites evaporate. And again, I think this just draws attention to the fact that cosmically, it seems that our lives have no ultimate meaning or significance. The universe is vastly massive and we are but tiny beings on one planet in a corner of the universe. Never visit this on another, as long as I can muster the courage and strength to not be your buster. They gun claim in anguish, mainly because I'm famous. They told me to beware of shaming language. The main thing I'd comment on here is that I think Greydon is predicting that this song would get pushback and that it will offend people, i.e. claim they have anguish, but that he really wants to put the point forward, and people have warned him of that, i.e. beware of shaming language, but that he wants to be forthright in his opinions. But I aim to change that, dug up the facts, compared the risk-reward ratio aspect, and none of it matched. And I think he's saying here he wants to change the framing around procreation because he dug up, the risks and rewards. He thought about the risks and rewards of coming into existence, and they didn't seem to match up. The odds really do seem to be stacked against the goods in favor of the bads. And if you want to get into that, I will actually link an article below by David Benatar. If you don't want to read the whole book, Better Never to Have Been, I will link that article because he goes over why our lives are much worse than people generally tend to believe and why the odds are stacked against us. I think it's very interesting and well-written article, so it'll be in the description. Though it's tempting, the possibilities will lie to your face. The only way is by denying the fate. So I play it safe and keep my unborn undisturbed safe in a sacred space. And I think here Greydon is simply just saying that the possibilities and potentials in life can often be deceiving. It can often be that we focus on the goods and ignore the bads when we're considering whether we should create someone or not. And that, plus the appeal of being able to create someone and have a kid, which many people find meaningful, is tempting. But he cares so much that he wants to play it safe and just leave his kids in, as he puts it, a sacred space. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on the lyrics of If I Had a Choice. That was my breakdown. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have a different opinion on how you interpreted the lyrics. Again, if Greydon has watched this, go easy on me. Let me know if you've checked out any of his other music, and I will see you in the next one.